Welcome to the deep dive. Take a moment and just consider this. What if the reality you interact with every single day, the one you perceive through your senses, is, well, only a partial view?
Mhm.
What if the limitations you feel in your physical body, or persistent challenges you face in creating the life you truly desire, whether that's abundance, healing, or joy, what if they aren't immutable
But
facts?
maybe just reflections,
Yeah.
temporary reflections of where you're at right now.
Exactly. And what if residing deep within you lies this incredible power, a power to manifest possibilities and heal your body in ways that, frankly, push the very boundaries of what traditional science tells us is possible?
That is a premise that immediately challenges, well, pretty much everything we think we know. Our sensory perception, the stuff that grounds us firmly in this physical, three-dimensional world.
Right, the world we can touch and see.
Yeah. It can often lead us to believe in this fundamental separation between ourselves and, I guess, a larger field of potential, a separation that perhaps doesn't truly exist at that deeper level.
Absolutely. And that fascinating challenge to our perception, that's precisely what we're diving into today. We are going to embark on a pretty extensive exploration looking at the profound, measurable connection between your mind, your body, and this broader field of consciousness.
And our insights today, they're drawn from the really compelling personal journey and, importantly, years of rigorous scientific investigation conducted by Dr. Joe Dispenza.
That's right. This deep dive is built upon the bedrock of a really rich conversation with Dr. Dispenza himself. He openly shared his remarkable origin story and distilled decades of empirical research.
hmm And he's delved deep into cases of spontaneous remissions,
Mhm.
those seemingly miraculous healings that just defy conventional explanation.
The ones doctors just can't explain away.
Exactly. And also the measurable effects of focused meditation and consciousness on human biology and potentially reality itself.
So, our mission for you today, as we navigate this material together, is to extract the most potent nuggets of knowledge. We want to help you truly understand Dr. Dispenza's comprehensive framework, which, yes, includes this often discussed concept of accessing a 5D reality.
But maybe more importantly,
More importantly, we want you to see how these ideas, which are increasingly backed by some seriously compelling data, could fundamentally impact your own life, your health, and your understanding of the incredible potential that lies within you.
and this whole body of work, this research, this teaching, it all started, didn't it, with one single pivotal moment in his life.
A huge personal challenge, one that became the catalyst for everything that followed.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So as you mentioned, this whole journey for Dr. Dispenza, it kicks off with a deeply personal and actually quite dramatic event.
Yeah, he was a young chiropractor, just starting out, I believe, and he gets hit by a truck during a triathlon.
Yeah. And this wasn't like a minor bump you just walk away from.
No kid? Far from it. It was catastrophic. He sustained severe fractures in his spine, specifically breaking 6 vertebrae from T8 down to L1, right in that thoracic lumbar region.
Wow, 6 vertebrae?
And one of those, the T12, was severely compressed, over 60% compression. Plus, he suffered a broken neural arch. This was back in 1986.
Okay.
And the prognosis from multiple leading surgeons at the time, well, it was incredibly bleak.
They were basically recommending what was considered pretty radical surgery back then, right? Especially for that kind of injury.
Extremely radical, yeah. It involved implanting these long Harrington rods the entire length of his spine, essentially fusing a huge section of it.
Goodness.
And even with that super invasive procedure, the predicted outcome was still a high likelihood of paralysis, or at best, severely limited flexibility for the rest of his life.
So, facing that kind of grim prognosis from multiple experts, what does he do?
Precisely. This is the critical juncture in his story. Faced with this unanimous medical recommendation, despite the overwhelming consensus, he made a profound choice not to have the surgery.
Wow, that takes guts.
It really does. His reasoning, as he recounts it, was a decision to, quote, roll the dice, but not in some kind of flippant way.
No, it sounds deeper than that.
It was rooted in a deep-seated belief, a recognition that there must be an intelligence within him, the same intelligence that was, keeping his heart beating right then, digesting his food, regulating all the complex processes of his body without any conscious input from him.
That background operating system we all have.
Exactly. He felt this was a consciousness, aware of him, giving him life.
And in that moment, that intense vulnerability and decision, he made a kind of commitment, a pact.
Yes, he made a very clear agreement with this inner intelligence, this power. He said, if this intelligence, this inherent power within him, could heal him completely, without the recommended external intervention.
Then he'd dedicate his life to it.
He would dedicate the rest of his life to studying this mind-body connection and teaching others about this potential.
Yeah.
It was a huge wager, really, not just on his physical recovery, but on the very principles that would become the foundation of his life's work.
What an extraordinary moment, that conviction, facing such overwhelming medical advice. But, okay, deciding is one thing. The actual process, attempting to heal his spine through conscious intent without surgery. That must have been agonizing, incredibly difficult.
Oh, he describes it vividly, calls it his dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
The immediate and overwhelming challenge was his own mind. Despite his decision, despite his belief, he found he simply couldn't control his thoughts.
Really? Even with that pact?
Yeah. His mind constantly defaulted to the worst-case scenarios the doctors had laid out. He was visualizing himself living in a wheelchair, getting consumed by fear about his future, practical worries like, should I sell my chiropractic practice?
So even with this powerful internal commitment, his, deeply ingrained survival programming was just kicking in full force.
Totally. Pulling his attention towards threat, limitation, predicting the most negative outcomes.
That makes sense.
That's the nature of the stress response,
Yeah.
right? It's designed to focus your attention on the external problem to ensure survival. He realized then that intellectual understanding wasn't enough.
Just knowing it wasn't doing it.
Not at all. He knew intuitively that he needed to get beyond his analytical thinking mind. That's the part of the brain that filters and processes information based on known past experiences and learned limitations.
The critic, the worrier.
Exactly. He needed to access a deeper level. What he later came to understand is changing his fundamental operating system. But doing that consciously, especially while in immense pain and fear, well, that was incredibly challenging.
It sounds like it required a level of mental discipline most of us can't even imagine.
He recounts spending hours daily in intense focus. It was a constant battle
Against his own thoughts.
against his own thoughts, trying to stay present, to hold the vision, and, importantly, the feeling of his desired future, a healed spine, a functioning body, and actively resist the powerful pull of the fear, the doubt, the ingrained thought patterns that kept screaming limitation in worst-case scenarios.
Wow.
It was a fight against his own conditioned biology, his own programmed responses, day after day.
But eventually, that relentless internal work, it started yielding results, small changes maybe.
Yes, and these were the first crucial sparks of validation. He began noticing shifts. His pain levels, which had been excruciating, started to decrease.
Okay, that's tangible.
Very tangible. He experienced sensory motor changes, sensations returning, or shifts in his ability to move or feel parts of his body that had been numb or limited. And what was so significant about this,
Yeah.
these were internal changes he was consciously initiating, or at least allowing, through his focus and intent. And they were producing a measurable physical effect outside of his mind in his physical body.
Yeah. And again, it's critical to remember, like you said earlier, there was no external medical intervention happening during this healing process, right?
Absolutely crucial point. No surgery, no medication, no body cast, which the doctors were actually preparing to put him in.
Right.
This was a process driven purely by his internal world. He was relying solely on that inner intelligence and his conscious connection to it.
And the outcome, seen through that lens, was, well, pretty remarkable.
Truly remarkable. In just 12 weeks, from the time of the accident and his decision, he was back on his feet.
12 weeks, from 6 broken vertebrae and that compression.
12 weeks. And within that same period, he was able to do everything he could do before the accident, running, swimming, cycling, back to his triathlon activities.
Which, given the initial prognosis of paralysis or severe limitation, that's just staggering. And this healing, it must have solidified his commitment, profoundly changing the trajectory of his life.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about being a completely different person after the healing. The material things, the stuff that had seemed so important before the accident, they just faded into irrelevance.
Priorities shifted massively.
Massively. He gained this immense appreciation for the simple aspects of life. The ability to just sit at a table without pain, to walk down the street, to watch a sunset. He realized he couldn't go back to his old life because he wasn't the same person anymore. The experience had fundamentally transformed him.
So emerging from this incredible personal transformation, the burning question became not just for him, but maybe for science too. What happened? And maybe even more importantly, how did it happen? He'd experienced something that traditional medicine simply couldn't explain.
That's exactly right. He searched for answers within the traditional medical models he knew, as a chiropractor. But The mechanisms for this kind of self-healing, this rapid and complete recovery from such a severe injury without intervention, they just weren't adequately explained there.
So he had to look elsewhere.
It pushed him to look beyond conventional boundaries, to explore fields that were then considered quite separate or maybe even a bit fringe in relation to physical health.
Fields like neuroplasticity, the brain changing itself.
Yeah, neuroplasticity, neuroendocrinology, the hormone connection, psychoneuroimmunology, mind over immunity, epigenetics, how our choices affect our genes, even electromagnetism, the body's energy fields, and quantum physics, the very nature of reality at its most fundamental level.
Wow, that's a broad sweep of science.
Precisely. He delved into these disparate fields looking for a unified understanding. And he encountered this profoundly influential idea from quantum physics that really resonated with his own experience.
What was that?
He quotes the idea that you cannot explain the physiology of a cut without a quantum understanding of reality.
Okay, hold on. That sounds really counterintuitive. Healing a cut, we think of that as purely biological, right? Chemicals, cells doing their thing. What does quantum physics add?
Well, it suggests that the traditional, purely mechanistic view of the body, just a collection of chemicals and mechanics, is incomplete. It implies that underlying the physical reality we perceive, there's a more fundamental level, a quantum level, where energy and information are primary.
And these are influencing matter, influencing the healing.
That's the idea. Influencing even something as seemingly simple and biological as the healing of a cut. This concept, this potential bridge between the quantum and the physical, that's what truly launched his deeper investigation into how consciousness could influence the material world, and specifically the body.
So this personal healing wasn't just a one-off miracle for him. It became a hypothesis, something to test. Could this process of self-healing, this apparent connection to a deeper intelligence or field, be studied in others? Could he find common threads?
That's exactly what drove his research forward. He initiated a large-scale, multi-year investigation into spontaneous remissions.
Okay, so he's actively seeking out people who healed unexpectedly.
Right. People who had healed from serious terminal or chronic conditions, diseases like late-stage cancers, Parkinson's, autoimmune disorders, blindness, muscular dystrophy, you name it. Cases where conventional treatments, or even many unconventional ones like specific diets or supplements, had either failed or just weren't proving effective.
So he wasn't just looking at people who got better with treatment, but those who recovered despite the odds, often when medical science had basically thrown up its hands.
Precisely. That was the key criterion. He traveled extensively, visiting over 17 countries, he says, interviewing hundreds of these individuals in depth. His objective was systematic.
Not just collecting cool stories.
No, he wanted to move beyond anecdotes and identify the cause, the underlying factors or internal shifts that had produced the healing effect. He was looking for the consistent patterns in their experiences and internal states, regardless of their specific illness or background.
And in this rigorous search for commonality, he mentioned he had to confront his own preconceived notions. He described himself as quite health conscious, a Puritan, about habits, vegan, gardening, yoga, supplements.
Yeah, he came into this research with the assumption, perhaps a bias, that factors like diet, exercise, or specific nutritional protocols might be the common threads among these remarkable cases.
Which seems logical, right? Healthy habits, better outcomes.
It does seem logical. But as he interviewed more and more people, he quickly realized that while those external factors are generally beneficial for health, they were not the consistent element he was finding in the spontaneous remission cases.
Really? So it wasn't the super strict diet or the perfect supplement regime?
Not necessarily. Many people he interviewed had not followed restrictive diets, rigorous exercise routines, or specific supplement protocols before their unexpected healing occurred.
So the commonalities weren't in their external behaviors or treatments,
Right.
but something else, something internal.
That's what became strikingly clear. He found other, far more prominent commonalities that transcended their diets, their exercise habits, their geographical locations, or even the specific diagnoses they had overcome. These common threads pointed towards fundamental shifts in their internal state and their relationship to reality.
Okay, so this leads him to identify what he calls the four pillars of change. These are the core common threads he found woven through the stories of these hundreds of individuals who had healed against all conventional expectations. This sounds like where the framework for potential transformation starts to take shape for you, the listener.
It really does. The first pillar, which he found almost universally present, was a profound belief in an inner intelligence or power within them.
Okay, like what we talked about with his own healing.
Exactly. This wasn't necessarily tied to a specific religion, mind you, but a deep sense that there was a vital, conscious life force residing inside them, something beyond their physical senses that was orchestrating their life and, crucially, with which they could somehow interact.
This connects back to that basic realization, doesn't it? That something is already incredibly intelligently running the show inside our bodies, making our hearts beat, processing information, repairing cells, all without our conscious management.
Precisely. These individuals tapped into a conviction that this intelligence wasn't just some blind biological program, but a conscious, aware presence within them. They felt they could communicate with it or surrender to it or somehow cooperate with it to facilitate healing. It was a recognition of an inherent conscious power.
Okay, that's pillar one. The second pillar dives into something really central to his teachings, changing their personality and breaking the habit of being themselves.
Yes, this is a critical concept. His core idea is that your personality, well, is defined by how you habitually think, how you habitually act, and how you habitually feel, day in, day out.
Makes sense.
So if you wake up each day and think the same thoughts, perform the same routine actions, and experience the same range of emotions, you are essentially reinforcing the same personality. And critically, he states that your personality creates your personal reality.
Personality equals personal reality.
That's the equation.
Yeah.
Therefore, if your personality stays the same, your life and your current circumstances, including your health, are very likely to remain the same.
So the turning point for many of these people he studied came when the external methods, the doctors, the pills, the diets, the treatments, basically reached their limit. They hit a wall.
Yes, they often reached a profound low point, a point of surrender where they realized they had to look inward because nothing outside of them was working anymore.
And that catalyzed a shift.
It catalyzed a process of becoming conscious of their unconscious selves. He estimates that by, say, age 35, about 95% of who we are, our thoughts, behaviors, emotional reactions, beliefs, perceptions, is simply a deeply ingrained unconscious program running on autopilot.
Wow, 95% unconscious programming. That's a lot.
It is. And becoming conscious of that automatic programming, especially if those programs are negative or limiting, must be incredibly uncomfortable.
I can imagine.
It is. He likens it to lighting a match in a very dark room. Suddenly, you see all the dust, the clutter, the unpleasant truths you've been avoiding about your own patterns. But this discomfort, he argues, is the necessary first step
To what?
to breaking the habit of being that old self.
Yeah.
They recognize that the persistent negative emotions they were holding on to, chronic anger, resentment, fear, guilt, were not serving them. In fact, they were fundamentally not loving to them or their bodies.
He emphasizes how strong emotions, particularly those tied to past events, can really hold us hostage, doesn't he? Like we place so much attention and energy on the past because of the powerful emotion attached to it.
Right. That strong emotional signature keeps the memory of the past event alive and highly charged in our system. Overcoming that emotion, processing it, feeling it fully, and letting it go. He describes that as finishing the emotion.
Finishing the emotion, I like that.
Yeah. And wisdom in this context isn't just the memory of the event, but the memory without that disabling emotional charge. This process of overcoming past-based emotions is crucial because it frees the body, which he describes as the record of the past, from being chemically conditioned to that past state.
And many of these emotions were stress-based.
Many of the debilitating emotions they changed were derived from stress hormones, fear, anxiety, powerlessness, sadness, victimhood. Living in a state of chronic stress, of survival, it drains the body's energy. It diverts resources away from essential functions like growth, repair, and immune surveillance. And this chronic imbalance is fertile ground for disease.
And he makes the provocative point that people can actually become chemically addicted to these stress hormones and the associated emotions, like literally addicted to feeling bad.
It's a powerful and, frankly, unsettling idea. The body becomes so conditioned to the familiar chemistry of fear or anxiety or victimhood that it literally starts to crave it. This is why change is so incredibly hard. When you try to break the habit of being yourself, stop complaining, stop blaming, stop feeling sorry for yourself. The body, which has been conditioned to be the mind, meaning the physical expression of those thoughts and feelings, it rebels.
How does it rebel?
It sends signals upstream to the brain, which we interpret as withdrawal-like cravings, urges to return to the familiar feelings of doubt, making excuses, blaming others, complaining. The body is basically demanding its familiar chemical fix.
That explains a lot about why sticking to new habits is so tough.
It really does. He also points out that even thoughts alone, just thinking stressful thoughts without an external trigger, can initiate the stress response in the body. It activates the fight or flight system and over time leads to the downregulation of genes associated with health and can actually make you sick.
So the choice to change, the decision not to think, act, and feel the same way they did the day before, it's not just a mental decision, is it? It's a biological battle.
It's exactly a battle against addiction and ingrained programming. It requires consciously stepping into the uncomfortable unknown, actively fighting against the body's powerful urge to drag you back to the familiar, predictable state of suffering or limitation. It's in this struggle, this conscious effort to override the program, that the real work of change begins. And that's where, as you frequently said, it gets really interesting.
Okay, which brings us perfectly to the third pillar, actively reinventing themselves and using conscious emotional rehearsal. This sounds like the creative part.
It is, having identified the old self they were letting go of and the negative emotional patterns they were breaking free from, these individuals then turn their attention to creating a new future, a new self. A key question they started asking was, if I healed tomorrow, or if this desired future I want actually manifested, how would I live? Who would I be in that new reality? How would I think differently, act differently, feel differently?
And it wasn't just a theoretical exercise like daydreaming. They actively practiced this new self.
Yes, very actively. They began mentally rehearsing, in detail, how they would behave in their new life. They would visualize themselves, interacting with others, handling specific situations, making different choices, all from the perspective of the person they are becoming.
So like practicing in their mind.
Exactly. This deliberate mental rehearsal is a form of neurological priming. It begins to install new circuits in the brain, creating the neurological hardware for the desired future behavior and mindset before it physically happens. It's like wiring the brain for the future.
But the truly transformative element, the part that goes beyond just positive thinking or visualization, is the feeling aspect, right?
This is absolutely the crucial step. They didn't just think about the future. They began to consciously generate and feel the emotions of that desired future reality as if it were already happening now.
So not waiting for the success to feel successful.
Precisely. They would cultivate elevated emotions like gratitude for the future, healing they hadn't yet seen, joy for the abundance they were creating, inspiration, love, empowerment, a genuine sense of success or wholeness.
So they were using their thoughts to create a picture of the future and their feelings to actually embody the experience of that future right here in the present moment.
Exactly. They were conditioning their body, on a biological level, to believe it was already living in that new reality. The body, remember, is objective. It doesn't know the difference between an emotion generated by an external event that just happened and an emotion generated purely by internal thought and focus.
So by feeling the future emotion now,
They were sending a consistent, coherent biological signal to their entire system that the future had arrived. And here's the fascinating consequence he describes. If you are genuinely feeling the elevated emotions of your desired future, say abundance or health or joy in this present moment, you naturally stop looking for it outside of yourself
why?
because it feels like you already possess it. Your internal state matches that future reality. This collapsing of the internal state with the desired external outcome, he posits, collapses the sense of separation and the perceived distance, the time, between you and your future.
That makes so much sense. If you feel abundant now, you're not desperately chasing abundance externally, you are it. Which leads to the fourth pillar. Losing track of space and time. This sounds like the state they achieved during this deep internal work.
Yes, this was a consistent report from individuals who achieved spontaneous remissions, and it's now consistently observed in meditators practicing his techniques. During their deep inward focus and emotional rehearsal, they would literally lose awareness of their physical environment and the linear passage of time.
Like getting lost in the moment.
Totally lost. An hour might feel like mere minutes, or they might have the sensation of being nowhere and no when, just pure awareness.
And he ties this directly to the activity of a specific part of the brain, the frontal lobe.
He does. He explains that the frontal lobe, situated right behind your forehead, acts like the conductor of an orchestra, or maybe a volume control for the rest of the brain. It's also considered the brain's primary creative center. When you hold an intention or an idea of a future possibility, the frontal lobe becomes highly active. It accesses the vast network of existing neurological circuits containing all your stored knowledge and past experiences, and it seamlessly weaves them together to construct a vivid, holographic image of that potential future reality in your mind.
So it's literally building a mental blueprint of the desired future you're focusing on.
Precisely, a very detailed blueprint, and driven by the intention held with awareness of their physical environment and the linear passage of time.
Like getting lost in the moment.
Totally lost. An hour might feel like mere minutes, or they might have the sensation of being nowhere and no when, just pure awareness.
And he ties this directly to the activity of a specific part of the brain, the frontal lobe.
He does. He explains that the frontal lobe, situated right behind your forehead, acts like the conductor of an orchestra, or maybe a volume control for the rest of the brain. It's also considered the brain's primary creative center. When you hold an intention or an idea of a future possibility, the frontal lobe becomes highly active. It accesses the vast network of existing neurological circuits containing all your stored knowledge and past experiences, and it seamlessly weaves them together to construct a vivid, holographic image of that potential future reality in your mind.
So it's literally building a mental blueprint of the desired future you're focusing on.
Precisely, a very detailed blueprint. And driven by the intention held within that frontal lobe, the brain then works to shorten the distance between the thought and the experience. To do this, the frontal lobe effectively lowers the volume or reduces the processing power directed towards the sensory information coming in from the external world.
What kind of information?
Information about your physical body, where it is, how it feels, your immediate environment, the room you're in, people around you, objects, and your awareness of linear clock time.
So by turning down the volume on the outside world,
Your inner world becomes more real than the outer world in that moment. When these individuals lose track of their body, their environment, and time during their practice, it's a strong indicator that their attention has successfully shifted away from the limited, known 3D reality. It's now primarily focused on the internal potential, the realm of possibility held, as you would say, in the quantum field.
and this allows the inner creative process, guided by the frontal lobe and fueled by that elevated emotion, to take precedence over the constant input from the material world.
Exactly. It gives that inner creation process the space and focus it needs.
Okay, these four pillars, the belief in inner intelligence, breaking the habit of the old self, especially those emotional habits, reinventing and feeling the future now, and losing track of 3D space and time during the process, they really seem to paint a clear picture of what these spontaneous healers were doing internally. But the next step is crucial for scientific validation. How do you move from these observed commonalities to actually measuring and proving how this process is affecting the body and mind?
Right. And that's where Dr. Dispenza's work has really bridged the gap between these, let's face it, seemingly mystical experiences and hard science. Based on these compelling observations from the spontaneous remission cases, he shifted towards designing specific scientific studies.
To investigate if these internal states and practices were actually causing measurable biological changes in people.
Precisely. He started creating environments specifically designed for both teaching these methods and conducting rigorous research simultaneously.
So he began holding these large events.
Exactly. Initially 4-day events, which then evolved into longer 7-day advanced retreats. Participants would come, learn, and engage in the practices, and at the same time, teams of scientists were on site towards designing specific scientific studies.
To investigate if these internal states and practices were actually causing measurable biological changes in people.
Precisely. He started creating environments specifically designed for both teaching these methods and conducting rigorous research simultaneously.
So he began holding these large events.
Exactly. Initially 4-day events, which then evolved into longer 7-day advanced retreats. Participants would come, learn, and engage in the practices, and at the same time, teams of scientists were on site conducting real-time measurements. They brought in researchers from various disciplines and institutions, collaborating with partners like UCSD and others.
And they weren't just doing surveys, they were looking at hard biological markers.
Oh yeah, they were measuring everything they could access. Changes in gene expression, levels of various metabolites in the blood, concentrations of proteins, real-time brain activity using electroencephalography, EEG caps,
Brain waves.
brain waves, heart rate variability, HRV, to assess heart coherence using monitors from HeartMath, and even going as far as studying the effects of blood plasma taken from advanced meditators on cells in vitro in petri dishes and analyzing changes in the gut microbiome.
Wow, that's comprehensive. The goal was to get objective data to correlate with the subjective experiences and the reported changes.
Absolutely, to see if the internal shifts were reflected in tangible, measurable biology.
Okay, so what have some of the key findings been from these extensive studies? What kind of profound biological shifts are they actually witnessing in people practicing these techniques?
Well, the data has been consistently remarkable, and for many of the scientists involved, initially quite challenging to believe, given the conventional paradigms they were trained in.
Like what specifically?
They've observed significant changes in gene expression occurring surprisingly quickly in some cases, within just 4 days of intensive practice at one of these events.
4 days. That seems incredibly fast for genetic changes.
It does. And these weren't just random genetic shifts. They included the upregulation, the turning up of genes associated with antioxidant production, the activation of stem cells, the regulation of the immune system, and even neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in the brain.
So genes related to healing, repair, protection.
Exactly. And they've also seen markers of cellular aging literally reverse. Telomeres, those protective caps on our chromosomes that typically shorten with age and stress.
Yeah, shorter telomeres are linked to faster aging.
Right. Well, they actually measured telomeres lengthening in participants who consistently practiced the meditations for 60 days.
Lengthening telomeres, that's basically turning back the biological clock at a cellular level.
That's precisely what the data suggests. And beyond the cellular markers, they've also documented dramatic improvements in psychological states, significant reductions in self-reported anxiety and depression levels across large groups of people.
Which makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? As he poses the question, how could you be anxious if you're not constantly trying to predict the future anymore based on the past?
Right. If your focus shifts from predicting the known past to actively creating an unknown but desired future, that primary source of anxiety, worrying about unknown negative outcomes, naturally diminishes.
Okay, but you mentioned plasma studies. That sounds like taking it another level.
It really does. And some of the most compelling and perhaps most controversial from a traditional standpoint, data comes from these plasma studies. They've taken blood plasma from advanced meditators, people with years of practice, and tested its effects on various cell types in laboratory settings, in vitro.
So the idea is that the plasma itself, the liquid part of the blood, holds some kind of biological information or specific chemistry generated by the internal state of the meditator.
That seems to be the implication. And the results are fascinating. Can I give you some specific examples?
Please do.
Okay. In one study, plasma from advanced meditators was shown to actually prevent the CoV pseudovirus, a lab model of the virus, from entering cells in vitro. They were even able to isolate a specific protein responsible for this protective effect, a protein found to be upregulated by genes in the meditator's system.
Wow. So their internal state produced something in their blood that had antiviral properties in a lab dish.
That's what the study showed. Then, in cancer research, plasma from advanced meditators significantly impacted uterine cancer cells in vitro. It reduced their mitochondrial function, essentially their energy production, by a staggering 70%.
Crippling the cancer cell's energy source.
Seems like it. In another cancer study, plasma from a high percentage, 84% of advanced meditators, demonstrated a direct anti-carcinogenic effect on cancer cells in the lab. And in studies related to Alzheimer's disease, the plasma from meditators was shown to downregulate the gene associated with Alzheimer's and contain factors that actually promote cell life and growth.
So let me get this straight. The internal state cultivated through meditation and conscious focus appears to be changing blood chemistry in ways that directly impact things like viral entry, cancer cell viability, and even genetic markers for neurodegenerative diseases. And this is all observed objectively in a lab setting.
That is what the empirical data is showing repeatedly now. And again, this is happening without the introduction of any external pharmaceutical substances. The body appears to be manufacturing these highly specific beneficial substances internally, influenced by the individual's state of consciousness and intention.
The body as its own pharmacy.
A very sophisticated one, it seems. And another fascinating collective finding emerged from the group events.
What was that?
At the end of the 7-day events, they analyzed gene expression across the attendees. They observed that 77% of participants were expressing the same genes and producing the same proteins, irrespective of their initial genetic makeup, their age, their gender, their background.
Wait, over 3/4 of the people were showing the same genetic and protein changes, regardless of who they were individually. That finding about collective gene expression is truly astounding.
Isn't it? It suggests that a shared experience, a collective intention and state cultivated within that group environment can influence biology on a fundamental genetic level across a large, diverse group.
It points towards what he calls an emergent
It
consciousness.
strongly points towards that concept, an
Mm.
emergent consciousness within the group that is collectively influencing and evolving their individual and shared biology in real time. It's wild.
That is wild. What about more common complaints like pain or fatigue?
They've looked at that too. In a study spanning 63 different diagnosed health conditions, a huge range.
Right.
100% of participants reported a significant change in their energy levels, fatigue, and pain after just a single intervention.
A single meditation practice.
One guided meditation practice.
100% reporting change across 63 different conditions after one meditation. From a conventional medical statistics viewpoint, that sounds, well, almost impossible.
It is statistically highly unusual data, to say the least, and it contrasts sharply with typical drug study effectiveness rates, which often struggle to show significant improvement in maybe 25% of participants for a single condition.
So what's behind the pain reduction specifically?
When they investigated that, they found that 100% of participants at the end of the 7-day events were producing their own endogenous opiates.
The body's natural painkillers, like endorphins.
Exactly. The body's natural, powerful pain relievers.
This implies that the body's internal pharmacy, when activated through these practices, is incredibly potent, maybe even more effective across a wide range of conditions than many external medications.
That's the compelling inference from the data. As Dr. Dispenza points out, there isn't a single pharmaceutical drug on the market that you could give to someone with any of 63 different conditions and expect it to alleviate pain universally. It just doesn't exist.
Which leads to the profound question. Is it the coherent state of the mind and heart directly influencing cells to produce these powerful natural chemicals?
That's the hypothesis. And he notes that the heart itself is known to produce opioids, interestingly enough.
Fascinating. And they've even looked at the complex ecosystem within us, the microbiome, our gut bacteria.
Yes, and the findings there were also dramatic. They found significant changes in the gut microbiome diversity and composition in participants after just 7 days of practice.
How did they assess the significance?
They use sophisticated AI algorithms. These algorithms are typically trained to predict specific diseases based on an individual's unique microbial signature in their gut. After the events, when they fed the post-event microbiome data from the participants back into the AI,
Yeah.
the algorithm could no longer predict that the person had their original health condition based on their gut bacteria profile.
The AI couldn't recognize the disease signature anymore.
Exactly. Plus, there was a significant upregulation, an increase in beneficial probiotic microorganisms.
Mm.
The researchers who conducted this study, based solely on the microbiome data, concluded simply, they're not the same person.
Wow, they're not the same person just based on their microbial signature alone. That's a powerful statement about the depth of the biological changes occurring.
It truly highlights how profoundly the internal state seems to be reshaping the entire biological landscape. So when you weigh this collective body of evidence, the consistent dramatic biological changes across large populations, we're talking gene expression, telomere length, neurochemistry, immune function, these plasma effects, pain reduction, microbiome composition,
A lot of data points.
a huge amount. And you compare it to the effectiveness rates seen in traditional drug studies, which, as we said, often hover around maybe a 25% significant improvement rate for a specific drug targeting a specific pathway.
The difference is just staggering. It really forces a fundamental reconsideration, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It challenges the skeptical viewpoint head on. He mentions that scientists who began this work with healthy skepticism, actively trying to find flaws in the methodology or the data, have studied the results repeatedly, analyzing the numbers 5 or more times, trying to disprove them. And the results hold up. As Dr. Dispenza states, with the weight of this empirical evidence, you can't call this pseudoscience any longer.
The sheer volume and consistency of the data are compelling the scientific community, or at least segments of it, to acknowledge that something significant is happening here that requires a new understanding, a new model.
Yes, the evidence is becoming too overwhelming to simply dismiss. And when you combine that hard data with the hundreds upon hundreds of documented testimonials, he mentions over 800 verified stories of incredible healings shared publicly.
Including medically confirmed cases?
Yes, medically confirmed cases of people who are blind regaining sight, individuals diagnosed with muscular dystrophy regaining the ability to walk, complete remissions of late-stage cancers.
Mhm.
When you put the data and the stories together, it creates a powerful force that is actively shifting collective consciousness and expanding belief in what's possible for human potential. Evidence, he believes, is ultimately the loudest voice in changing perceptions.
Which leads us perfectly into the theoretical model that attempts to explain how these internal changes, backed now by all this scientific data, can create such profound external shifts. It links back to that idea of creating from a deeper level of reality, this concept often referred to as 5D, or creating from the field. What's his physics model behind this?
He describes a model rooted in quantum physics, but it starts not with matter, not with the physical stuff we see, but with the idea of the vacuum energy or the void.
The void, like empty space.
Not empty in the sense of nothingness.
Yeah.
Rather, it's understood as a realm of pure energy, pure consciousness, a unified field containing infinite potential realities, but all in a non-manifest energetic form, like pure potential waiting to happen.
Okay, so before anything physical appears, there's this underlying intelligent, boundless field of pure potential, like an ocean of possibility.
Exactly, a good analogy. And for matter, for physical reality, to manifest from this void, from this ocean, he explains that a vibratory sensation, a frequency, a disturbance must be introduced into the stillness of the void.
A disturbance, like a thought.
This disturbance can be understood as a conscious thought or intention, carrying a specific frequency, it's a specific pattern of information.
So thought isn't just an abstract process happening inside our skulls. It has a vibrational reality that can actually interact with this fundamental field.
That's the implication. He describes a hierarchy of frequencies. Pure consciousness in the void is the fastest frequency, a state of absolute speed, and yet absolute rest simultaneously, paradoxically. And matter, the stuff we perceive with our physical senses, is the slowest frequency, the most dense vibration.
Okay, fastest is consciousness, slowest is matter.
Right. He suggests that humans, with our intense focus on the physical world through our senses, have kind of descended, in a sense, from this state of oneness, this source consciousness, into the density of 3D reality. And here our senses fool us into believing this physical world is the only reality, and that we are separate individuals contained within it, separate from each other and separate from that source field.
And our attention gets locked onto this limited 3D world, reinforcing that sense of separation.
Especially when we are in stress or survival mode. Remember, stress hormones narrow our focus. In survival, your attention must be intensely focused on the material, the known, the external threat, your body's state, the immediate environment, the passage of time, because that's how you survive in a purely physical sense. He calls this being a materialist.
Focused only on matter.
Focused only on matter. But he emphasizes a fundamental paradigm shift here, based on quantum understanding. It's not that matter emits a field around it, like we usually think. Rather, it's the field itself, that underlying consciousness and energy that lowers its frequency to create matter.
Whoa, so the field creates matter, not the other way around.
That's the model. Our physical bodies, when you examine them at the quantum level, are apparently over 99.99999% energy and information. Not solid stuff at all.
So we're primarily field, just condensed into the appearance of matter. This changes everything about how we might think about influencing reality, doesn't it?
It completely flips the script. It leads to a crucial distinction between creating from 3D reality versus creating from the field, which he associates with accessing a 5D state of consciousness.
Okay, explain the difference. What's 3D creation?
In 3D creation, we operate from the perception of separation and lack. The underlying thought is often, I want that thing because I don't have it. This approach involves matter trying to change matter.
Like working hard, pushing, striving in the physical world.
Exactly, which is inherently a slow, effortful process. It involves a lot of doing, forcing outcomes, controlling situations, competing for what seem like limited resources in the physical world.
And our brain, using its predictive function based on past experience with matter changing matter, estimates that achieving the desired future outcome will take significant time, months, years, even decades, because that's the typical rate of change we observe in the 3D world through physical action alone.
Exactly. It's a linear, sequential cause and effect model, based entirely on the past and the limitations of physical interaction. But creating from the field, or what he calls 5D creation, operates completely differently.
How so?
It involves consciously getting beyond your limited self, disconnecting your attention from your body, your environment, and your awareness of linear time. And by doing that, You connect to that field of pure consciousness, that realm of infinite potential.
The void, the ocean of possibility.
Yes, in this state, the perceived separation between your individual consciousness and the consciousness of the unified field, this underlying oneness, diminishes significantly. You feel more connected, less separate.
And how do you create from this state of connection? Is it just thinking positive thoughts?
It's more than that.
Yeah.
It's a precise combination of thought and feeling. Your clear intention, your thought about what you want to create, produces a specific frequency, like a signal. But to interact powerfully with the field of potential, you must also generate and feel the frequency of that thought, meaning the emotion of that desired reality in the present moment.
Ah, back to feeling the future now.
Exactly. If you desire abundance, you must feel abundant now.
Yeah.
If you desire healing, you must feel wholeness now. It's about feeling the future before it has physically manifested in your 3D reality.
So you're aligning your internal energetic state, the combined frequency of your thought and emotion, with the frequency of the potential reality you want to experience out there in the field.
Precisely. By generating the emotion of the future now, you are conditioning your body to exist in that future state energetically. And when your internal state, your frequency, matches the frequency of a potential that already exists in the quantum field.
Then what happens?
He describes this as collapsing the distance, the time and space between your consciousness and that potential reality. You essentially draw it to you, or rather you become a vibrational match for it. Because by connecting to the field, you are connecting to the source of all creation. You are the source. You're creating from cause, not effect.
And the evidence, the proof that this process is working in your life, how do you know it's not just wishful thinking?
He says the proof appears externally in your 3D reality in the form of synchronicities, serendipities, meaningful coincidences that start showing up in your life with increasing frequency.
Like things just falling into place, meeting the right person, finding the right opportunity.
Exactly. These aren't just random occurrences according to this model. He sees them as the field, this intelligent realm of potential, arranging circumstances, people, and events in your 3D reality in direct response to your elevated, coherent, internal state. They serve as feedback.
Feedback that you're on the right track.
Feedback proving to you, the individual, that you are actively creating your reality, that you are the cause, not merely a victim of external circumstances reacting to life. And it's this tangible feedback, this experience of the magic of creation that motivates people to continue the practice. Because frankly, they don't want that connection, that creative flow, that magic to end.
This sounds incredibly powerful, almost like having superpowers. But accessing that state, getting beyond the limited 3D self to connect with the field as nobody, that must be the really challenging part of the practice, right?
It's arguably the core challenge, the most difficult aspect for most people. Absolutely. You simply cannot access the field of infinite potential while still holding on to the identity of your limited 3D self, the self that is defined by your body, your past experiences, your environment, your problems, your familiar emotions.
You can't take your baggage with you into the void.
Essentially, no. You must learn to consciously shed that identity, even temporarily, and enter the field as, in his words, a nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, no time. Pure consciousness. This requires consciously disconnecting your attention from everything physical and known. It means unlearning the deeply programmed belief, reinforced constantly by our senses and society, that you are just a separate, localized entity distinct from the larger field of consciousness. Even when you get quiet, you might still feel like Joe is here, the vacuum is over there, still believing you're separate. That takes practice to overcome.
And this process of letting go, of getting beyond the self, it involves confronting the uncomfortable aspects of who we've been, doesn't it? The stuff we don't like about ourselves.
Yes, he talks very candidly about this stage. He calls it passing through the valley of the shadow of darkness.
That sounds intense.
It is. This is the necessary confrontation with the lower frequency emotions, the guilt, shame, unworthiness, suffering, anger, fear that we may have unconsciously lived by or perhaps suppressed for years, even decades. It is not a comfortable phase. It can feel very dark and challenging as these buried emotions surface to be finally seen, processed, and released.
But it's necessary.
Absolutely necessary work to dismantle the old identity, the old personality. It forces the question, if not now, when will I face this part of myself and finally break free?
So the discomfort, the challenge of facing those old emotions and thought patterns, it's not a sign that it's not working, but actually a sign that the process is working, that you're breaking down the old structure.
Precisely. Overcoming the old self is the process of becoming the new self. There's a kind of biological death of the old identity. The
Mm.
neural pathways associated with old thoughts start to prune away. The chemical conditioning of old emotions loses its grip. The automatic behaviors begin to fade, all because you're starving them of your attention and energy.
Which requires courage and persistence.
Definitely. And sustaining the new state is also paramount. He emphasizes that meditating multiple times a day, especially when you're starting out, is often necessary, not just to initiate the change, but to consciously change and sustain an elevated emotional state throughout your day, particularly when you notice yourself defaulting back to those old familiar patterns and feelings.
Keep reinforcing the new state.
Exactly. The stronger and more consistent the elevated emotion you generate, the more it anchors you in the belief and the feeling of the future you are creating, making it easier to resist the powerful gravitational pull of the past.
And the practice isn't just confined to sitting down with your eyes closed, is it?
No, absolutely not. The ultimate goal is to embody this new state, this new self, in your waking daily life. This is where practices like walking meditations come in, or simply making the conscious choice throughout your day, in your interactions, your activities, your decisions, to think, act, and feel as the future self you are becoming.
Living it.
As he puts it, you have to walk the path, not just know about it intellectually or experience it only in meditation. It's a process of believing in the potential future, consciously behaving as that future self in the present, and thereby becoming that future self. Believe, behave, become. That's the sequence.
Believe, behave, become. I like that. And this work isn't just individual. He also explores the incredible potential when people come together in this coherent state, the power of the collective.
Yes, the research on the collective field dynamics at his events is particularly compelling and, maybe, points toward the future of this work. When large numbers of people gather with a shared intention and consciously enter states of brain and heart coherence simultaneously,
What happens then?
they create what he calls an emergent consciousness. Their individual coherent energetic fields begin to interfere constructively, like waves building on waves in water, creating a much larger amplitude of energy in the quantum field in that present moment in that room.
So the combined coherent energy of the group creates a more powerful signal interacting with the field of potential, like amplifying the creation process.
Exactly. He posits that this amplified collective coherence makes the energy required for seemingly extraordinary events, spontaneous healings happening right there in the room, profound mystical experiences, uncanny synchronicities occurring for multiple people, more accessible, more probable, and more present in that environment.
Why? Because the potential is charged up by the group.
Because that potential is now part of the collective consciousness of the group, and is backed by a significantly amplified energy signature. Remembering that thought creates frequency and consciousness is energy. More coherent energy, more power to influence the field.
And as research continues to evolve, right, pushing into new frontiers.
Constantly. They're always innovating their measurement techniques and exploring new areas. One really fascinating avenue is the study of endogenous molecules. These are powerful compounds naturally produced by the body that seem to be intentionally created internally by individuals through focused intent and achieving these elevated states.
Like the body creating DMT or other powerful compounds on demand.
Potentially. It underscores the idea that the autonomic nervous system, when consciously directed through practices like this, can function like an incredibly sophisticated targeted pharmacy, creating exactly what's needed.
So the body can manufacture its own healing chemicals or even consciousness-altering chemistry purely through directed intention and achieving a certain energetic state.
That's what the preliminary evidence suggests. And it's a frontier they are actively exploring. They're developing new devices and instrumentation to measure these subtle biological and energetic shifts even more precisely.
And applying it to different groups.
Yes, they're also conducting specific studies with diverse populations to see how these principles apply and manifest in different contexts. Pairing young and old individuals, investigating potential mitochondrial DNA changes passed between mothers and daughters, working with highly disciplined groups like Navy SEALs, within the military, and even exploring this potential within prison populations.
That wide range of studies really speaks to the potential universality of these principles, doesn't it? Regardless of background or circumstance.
It really does. And through all of this research, all the data, all the testimonials, Dr. Dispenza consistently expresses a deep sense of humility and, frankly, astonishment. Even after years of witnessing these profound, measurable changes, he still says things like, "I can't believe this is the truth," acknowledging how consistently and dramatically the results challenge his own scientific background and preconceived notions. The evidence continues to humble him, he says.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, It feels like we've journeyed from a personal crisis that sparked a profound inquiry, all the way through the common threads found in unexpected healings, the rigorous scientific validation of measurable biological changes, and finally, into a model of reality based on quantum physics that suggests we can literally create from a field of pure potential by getting beyond our limited 3D selves.
Yeah, we've seen that the core ideas really revolve around recognizing and connecting with a powerful intelligence within us, understanding that crucial link between our personality, our habitual thoughts, behaviors, emotions, and our personal reality,
Mhm.
and learning how to consciously shift that personality.
In the transformative practice, the how to seems to lie in actively rehearsing and, crucially, feeling the elevated emotions of our desired future now. Using that coherent energetic state to condition our body and collapse the perceived distance, the time and space between our current state and the potential reality we wish to manifest, drawing it to us through resonance.
And while acknowledging that the path of change isn't always easy, it requires courage, facing and moving through that valley of the shadow of darkness, confronting and releasing old, limiting emotions. The extensive data and the hundreds of documented stories of healing and transformation provide really compelling evidence that this process is not only possible, but can lead to profound benefits. We're talking physical healing, emotional freedom, manifesting new possibilities across all areas of life.
And accessible tools, like the morning and evening meditations he offers, they provide a practical entry point for you, the listener, to begin practicing these principles. Learning to get beyond the analytical mind, sensing space, connecting to the field, and consciously changing your energetic state. And understanding the what and why behind these practices, as we've hopefully explored today, really empowers you to engage with them more effectively.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. If the scientific data is demonstrating pretty convincingly now that our own bodies, when influenced by a coherent mind and heart, can produce potent healing chemistry, potentially more effective and versatile than many external drugs, what does that overwhelmingly imply about the inherent, largely untapped potential that resides within you right now?
It leaves us with the powerful question, doesn't it? Could the greatest source of healing, transformation, and maybe even abundance not be something we need to desperately search for outside ourselves, but something that has been patiently waiting right here within us all along?